Yes, thank you.
You bet. Thank you.
And Zabre, whom you just heard speaking, is also a member of the League of Women Voters of Oakland and is going to be monitoring the chat. If questions occur to you as I'm talking about the measures, please write your questions in the chat. We're planning to talk about 3 measures and then stop briefly to talk to deal with the questions about those 3 measures. And at that time, if we can, we may take some that are just offered verbally, but it would be best if you could write your questions in the chat. That way we can know whether we've got duplicate questions or just how many we're going to be dealing with and so on. We've allowed an hour and a half for the presentation and hope that that will be enough. I don't want you to have to listen to me for the entire time. We do want it to be an interactive event. So I think without further ado, let's go forward. I can't take credit for this lovely presentation. It was prepared by another member of the League of Women Voters of Oakland, Helen Neville. And of course, now when I want to proceed, it is not going forward. And I don't know why. So let's try this way. Okay, so the League of Women Voters, so many of you may be familiar with the League of Women Voters, but just a little bit of introduction. The League wears, we call it, we wear 2 hats. We do a lot of voter education, particularly before elections, but we also care very deeply about the issues that affect all of our lives. And so after study and coming to consensus and developing a position, we do quite a lot of advocacy. But I'm wearing the education hat today. I'm going to be talking about both sides of the issues. You'll notice occasionally that the League has taken some positions on some of the ballot measures, but I'm going to be giving you both sides of the issues today. So a little bit of warning. What I'm going to be telling you is what the supporters and the opponents say. That's the information that will appear on the slide. But you need to understand that what the opponents and the proponents say about a measure is not necessarily true. They're trying to persuade you to vote the way they would like you to. And so they may mislead, they may offer half-truths, they may try to use wording that will be scary. I'm not in a position to tell you which arguments are valid and which ones are not. That's going to be up to you, and you'll probably want to do some additional reading after the presentation today. How do you evaluate a measure? Which side do you agree with? Who's really behind it? That can give you some hint. Who's been spending money to make sure that you vote the way they would like you to? Is it a single topic or more complicated? At some point several years ago, the state passed a ballot measure, probably, that ballot measures needed to be focused on a single topic, but sometimes those measures get fairly complicated, as you will learn. So on the ballot in November, there will be 12 state measures that all of us throughout the state will be able to vote on. There are 4 measures on the ballots in Oakland, 3 by the city and 1 by the school district. And then there is an Alameda County ballot measure, which any of you watching today would be able to vote on if you live in Alameda County. If you live in Kensington or in Contra Costa County, you won't see those measures. Something that most of you probably understand completely is that school tests are different from voting. And when you take a test in class, hopefully you are answering every question that's on that test. When you're voting, it is perfectly okay not to vote for every measure. If there's one that you don't understand well enough to feel that you could vote intelligently, leave that box empty when you are doing your mail-in ballot. So let's get started on the state propositions. Proposition 4 is will authorize the sale of bonds for stem cell research. And measures are put on the ballot in several different ways. This one was put on by gathering signatures from citizens. And by way of background, in 2004, federal funding for stem cell research was prohibited. So California voters approved $3 billion in bonds, and the original money has almost been all spent at this point. Federal funding is now allowed, and there are private funds that have become available for stem cell research. If this measure passes, the effect will that it will permit the state to sell $5 billion of bonds, which will be repaid by the California General Fund. The money will be used for medical research and for education, and the money is given out in the form of grants to educational, nonprofit, and private research groups. The budget effect of selling bonds. Repaying the $5 billion for bonds involves paying interest, and that comes out of the general fund as well, and it will cost about $260 million a year over about 30 years for a total cost of about $7.8 billion. Contributions have been coming in support of this measure. You can see in the list the people who have given large amounts of money. If you see $3 signs, it means that the contribution has been in the millions. If there are $2 signs, it means it's over $100,000. If it is, if there's just a single dollar sign, it means it's under $100,000. So there you can see who the contributors are and who some of the other people are who support the measure and who are the people who oppose it or have done an editorial against it. And here we go with what the people who support it say, that the research that will be done with the money that's provided by the bonds will help to fight diabetes and cancer and Alzheimer's and other diseases. So far, they have done a lot of basic research, that almost 300 papers have been published, and they would like to be able to continue this important research. Those who are against this measure say, California has higher priorities right now with so many people out of work, and there are other sources of money now that weren't available earlier when the first bond measure was issued. So far, though they've hoped to come up with treatments for diseases, only 2 have been approved so far. And then concerns have been raised because some people feel that people who are on the board who decide which grants will be made and to whom are people from the institution that received the grants. What your vote means. If you vote yes on Proposition 14, it means that California will be authorized to sell bonds to consider this stem cell research. If you vote no on this measure, there will be no authorization to sell additional bonds to raise money for stem cell research. Proposition 15, commercial property taxes for schools and communities. Again, this is a measure that was put on the ballot by collecting signatures to put it on the ballot. And the group wanting to put it on the ballot not only once, but twice. After having qualified it for the ballot, they were hearing a lot of feedback that the measure was not going to pass. And so they circulated those petitions again and were able to place a slightly revised measure on the ballot that met some of the concerns that were being raised early on. This is a measure that refers back to a very well-known proposition, Prop 13, that affects the property tax on businesses and residential properties. So in '78, Prop 13 was passed, and the amount of property tax that could be charged was limited in value to 1% of the purchase price of the property. And then increases were limited to 2% per year. It was a time when there was a lot of pressure. Property taxes were going up quickly, and a lot of people were very unhappy about that and worried that they weren't going to be able to keep their property. And so Prop 13 was passed at that time. Market value since then, as we all know pretty well in the Bay Area, has risen much more than 2% per year. And business property, which originally was paying a much higher percentage of the property tax than the money that was taken in from residential property, we've discovered that the businesses are not sold as frequently as residential properties are. And so reevaluation of the business properties has not taken place very often. Business properties are owned longer, or the people who own it have figured out ways to transfer part of the property but not sell enough of it to trigger that reassessment. And so now, rather than the money in property taxes being a larger percentage from businesses than from residential, it's flipped. And so now 2/3 of the property tax benefit has gone to businesses, not to the homeowners who originally were the ones for whom Prop 13 was developed. So the effect of Proposition 13, excuse me, Proposition 15, is that business properties, rather than being reassessed only when they changed hands or were sold, business property with a fair market value of over $3 million would be reassessed at market value. This process would be phased in gradually so that the folks in the counties who do the assessment wouldn't be flooded with reassessments that would overwhelm them. So it would be phased in gradually, and business property, after being reassessed initially, would then be reassessed every 3 years at current market value. So it would be quite a change for business property from being the tax rate being fixed on the original purchase price to now being fixed on the reassessed property value, market value. There would be exemptions, and these exemptions are important, particularly to those who would like this message to be passed. The rates would not increase on homes or living spaces, even if the apartment buildings are owned by large landowners. Rates would not be increased on small businesses which have a market value of under $3 million. Rates would not be increased on agricultural or religious land. So Prop 13 will be in place for these types of property. It's just commercial property that's affected by Proposition 15. The budget effects, if Proposition 15 is passed, it would raise a considerable amount of money, from $6.5 to $11.5 billion per year in commercial property taxes. And those dollars, after the cost of levying the taxes, would be spent with 60% of the additional income that came in would go to local governments, and 40% would go to school districts and community colleges, with the result that it would raise per student funding by about $100 per year. And here you have the picture of what's going on in this particular race, the dollars that are being contributed. In favor of Proposition 15, $42 million have been contributed as of yesterday, against $34 million. And some of the usual suspects are in each of these lists. And the arguments for and against. Wealthy companies should pay taxes based on what property is worth now instead of on original purchase price. Proposition 15 will help pay for schools, fire, and other important services. Those who are against this say higher business taxes will raise the cost of everything that people buy, food, gas, and healthcare. Proposition 15 will hurt smaller businesses. What your vote means. If you vote yes for Proposition 15, it will mean a change in the way business or commercial property is taxed. It will raise business property taxes. If you vote no, it will not raise business property taxes. Everything will stay as Proposition 13 is currently written. Let's go on to Proposition 16. This one refers back to Proposition 409 that was on the ballot quite a few years ago in 2009, in 1996. When at that time, when Proposition 209 was passed, it forbade the state to grant special treatment based on race or sex. This is a measure that was put on the ballot by the state legislature. The effect, if Prop 16 is passed, would allow the California state government and its institutions to consider diversity, race, ethnicity, or sex in public employment, contracting, and public education. It would not establish quotas, those are unconstitutional, but considering diversity is not unconstitutional. Money being raised for and against this measure, 14 million by the proponents of the measure and 1,031,000 for those who oppose this measure. Those in favor of this says that if we can return to affirmative action, it will help make up for longstanding discrimination, and that all Californians deserve opportunity and education. Those who are against this measure passing say, don't favor one racial group over another. The state should treat everyone the same. So we've now done 3 measures, Zabre. Are there questions that have come in for the 3 measures that we've done so far?
My name is Susan Pierpoint, and I have a question about Proposition 15. I was surprised to read in a minority newsletter that it's believed that Proposition 15 would be devastating to small woman and minority-owned businesses who rent space for their businesses because a typical lease agreement has a provision in it that provides that the renter pays a proportion of the taxes. And you know, on its face, Prop 15 looks like a no-brainer to me, but this has got me thinking and a little worried.
Okay, and that is a question that the proponents are aware of. Small businesses frequently do not own the property in which they run their business. They do rent. And some leases do pass on any increase in the expenses of the person who owns the property in the lease payments. Not all of them do. And more often than not, lease payments are most affected by availability of space as opposed to property taxes. And so I think that those who are in favor of this measure feel that this is not a blanket problem. That yes, some may find that their rents are going to go up, but it's not going to be a large percentage, hopefully not a large percentage of their rent. And I think we probably ought to try to take any written questions that came in before we open the microphones, if that's all right. Zabre, are there written questions or not?
There are a few, and that was one of them. So
Okay,
Susan, thanks for speaking up. And that I'll just add, that is a controversial point on this measure. And Bonnie mentioned that they had refiled, the proponents had refiled. The reason they refiled, and she may have mentioned this, I'm repeating it, is because they were trying to increase the carve out for small businesses to protect small businesses. So there's that $3 million exemption on rent, but we obviously live in an expensive part of the world. So I don't know how far that 3 million goes, but you cut to one of the most controversial points on the measure. There was also Roberta says rents are usually more affected by market competition. And Susan also had mentioned, Susan, I'm adding this, I read that minority-owned businesses are opposed to Prop 15 because of that effect. And you can see that does show up in the opposition to the measure. And then Hillary Naylor had a question. slash observation on Prop 14, Bonnie, which
Mhm.
was, she commented that the Friends Committee on Legislation opposed Prop 14, which surprised her. Their argument was it doesn't make sense to prioritize state revenues for this research during a budget crisis when affordable housing, healthcare, and education are facing budget cuts. But then she went on to say that they do generally oppose bond measures. Hillary, do you have anything to add to that? You should be off mute unless you're personally muted.
Yeah, no, I just wondered if this had been part of the consideration in coming up with the pros and cons, balancing out the need for the funds for this research, which got well funded when it first passed, and compared to today when the financial situation is a little bit different.
So the pros and the cons, the arguments, pros and con, are not ones that the league has come up with. These are things that are the statements that are being made by those who sponsored the measure or are supporting it, or people who spoke against it, who signed the arguments against it. So we have tried to give a balanced presentation of the types of things that those who are in favor of it say and those who are against it say. Again, it's not the league's positions on this at all, though you'll notice that there are some measures where the league has taken a position on a measure, and so some of the league's arguments may be presented there.
Judith says, regarding Prop 14, who does the research?
Oh, mine's the same. Okay.
So I have everyone off mute, so you can participate if you need to, but do mute yourself, please, if you're not speaking. Allison, Colvin, could you mute yourself, please? Okay. Who does the research? Judith asks. Does California or other states pay for similar research?
So the people who receive the grants, I think, are a lot of University of California scientists. I am not familiar with whether or not somebody from outside of California can apply for grants from this fund if the measure is passed.
It already started.
Well, my question was also, is this a unique thing just for stem cell research, or do states provide funding for other types of scientific research in the same way?
When you say that, do you mean do other states have similar bond measures to raise money to support research, medical research?
Yeah, basic research. Like, it just seems like an odd thing for a state to pay for at this time of budget restraints.
Yeah, and I don't know the answer to that question about whether other states have done this. I think that there was a lot of interest in California when the initial measure was passed to do this type of research, and they felt thwarted by the fact that the federal government, particularly probably the National Institutes of Health, were not funding this. And so this is why California stepped up to do it at this point.
Right.
And I think that this is why it's important to understand that there is now the prohibition against funding stem cell research is not as stringent as it was, if it is still there, and that there also is private money that's available or other money that's available for medical research now.
Okay.
Can I add to that really
Sure.
quick?
Yeah,
So,
me too.
President Obama lifted that restriction about 10 years ago. So now there is federal funding for stem cell research, and there's a lot more private investment. So this is pretty unusual for a state to jump in on something like this. And the conditions have shifted since the original measure was
Well,
enacted.
I'll just try. I'll go out of mine.
So if I could,
I think that we ought to mute people, and perhaps I ought to start back up again. I'm concerned because it's already 2:30, so.
Go for it, Bonnie.
Okay, good. So I'm going
Oh, whoops.
to Proposition 17.
I'm gonna leave.
And so we need to be sure that everybody's
Mute.
muted.
Oh, hang on.
Able to mute everybody now?
I think everyone's muted except you.
Okay, thank you. All right. So Proposition 17 is a constitutional amendment that was placed on the ballot by the state legislature, and it would allow parolees to vote. Current law says that felons can vote only after completing both their prison sentence and their parole. Proposition 17 would allow felons to vote when they're out of prison. Parole often lasts for as much as 3 years, and so this will help the reentry community become re-engaged with their community more quickly. Those who favor Proposition 17 are listed here. A lot of money has been raised for this. Well, not relatively, but money has been raised to pass this ballot measure. Not so much for those who oppose it, but you see there those who are listed. I was curious what the Election Integrity Project was, and it's a group of people who are concerned about fraud in voting, a familiar theme that's been expressed by our administration. So those who are in favor of Proposition 17 say that people on parole pay taxes and they therefore should be able to vote, and that voting connects people to their communities, so it increases public safety. Hopefully, I think that the thought is that if people are engaged with their communities, that they're less likely to do bad things. Those who argue against this proposition say that people should complete parole before voting because parole time is for criminals to prove that they have changed. What your vote means: if you vote yes for Proposition 17, it will allow parolees who are currently not allowed to vote if they're still on parole. That will allow them to vote when they complete their prison sentence, but while they are still on parole. If you vote no on this, it will not allow parolees to vote. It will stay with the current situation. Proposition 18, again, something put on the ballot by the state legislature. It would be a constitutional amendment, and it would allow some 17-year-olds to vote. The effect of this measure, if it passes, that it would allow 17-year-olds to vote in the primary if they will be 18 by the upcoming general election. So the primary usually is in March or June before the November election, and the thought is that if we're determining who the candidates are going to be on the general election ballot during the primary, and if somebody's going to be 18 when they're going to be voting in the general election, they also ought to be able to vote in the primary election. People who favor this have contributed about $450,000, and those against it, not a significant amount of money. Again, the group that's in opposition to this is that Election Integrity Project of California. The arguments in favor of this say that it will help increase voter participation, that voters should be able to choose the candidates whom they'll be voting on in the November ballot. So if you're 17 now at the time of the primary, but are going to be able to vote at the time of the general election, you also ought to be able to vote during the primary. Those who oppose this say that 17-year-olds just are not legal adults. They're not mature enough to make important decisions. And the people who are against this are concerned that the children, the teenagers, the 17-year-olds will be influenced in their vote by teachers and their counselors. So if you vote for Proposition 18, you will be saying, let's allow some 17-year-olds to vote. If you vote against this measure, you're saying, do not allow 17-year-olds to vote. Proposition 19, another one of these complicated ones that relates to Prop 13. This are property tax changes that would benefit seniors, severely disabled, families, and victims of Wildfire or Natural Disasters Act. And again, this was put on the ballot by the state legislature and is a constitutional amendment. The current situation, governed by Proposition 13 and subsequent legislation, is that when senior homeowners move, the tax value of their next home remains the same as it was in the old home if the property that they've bought costs less or has a lower value or the same value as their old home, rather than rising to the market value of the new home. That's the current situation. If Proposition 19 passes, this is what the situation would look like. If the value of that new home, currently, if the value of that new home was less or the same, you could transfer the tax rate to that new home. Under Proposition 19, you could buy a home of greater value than the one that you are selling. And if you are a senior, your property tax rate will be the same as it was on your old home. Currently, this benefit of the transfer tax or tax transfer is available only in 10 counties. If Proposition 19 passes, it would be available throughout the state of California. The current situation is that the number of transfers that a senior or a disabled person or somebody whose home has been, they've had to move because of a disaster, you could use this tax transfer only once. If Proposition 19 passes, the disaster displaced will still only be able to do it one time, but the part that's off the screen there says that seniors or the disabled would be able to use it 3 times. So they could sell their home 3 times, and each time they would be able to retain the original tax value of their old property as they moved. So this measure also talks about what happens when somebody inherits a piece of property, a family inherits a piece of property. Currently, when a home or a farm is inherited by children, the old lower tax value continues. So inheritance has the same benefit as if the property were sold and somebody moved to a new home. The effect of Proposition 19 is that if the home is inherited, in order to get that tax benefit, the family must live there full time. They can't just get the benefit of the tax cut and while renting it out. And then there's a little hook to this. After February 23rd, the tax on this family land will increase if the market value is more than $1 million greater than its taxable value. And Helen has created a graph to illustrate that I'm not sure I find it as helpful, but you may find it to be so. So there on the left, you see the original purchase price, and the assessed value is the black line that's going up, showing the original plus 2% per year inflation. And then it shows the point at which the house is inherited. And in this time, the market value has increased greatly. And now the market value is more than $1 million more than the assessed value, in which case then there could be an increase in the property tax, that the house would be reassessed. And I think a slide shows how much additional tax one might need to pay. I think it's just that purple line, not the whole black line between the initial purchase and inherited value and the green line of the market value. Yes, so there would be a new assessed value. So why is this an issue? Apparently, a lot of people who inherit homes rather than living in them do rent them. And these are the percentage of inherited homes that are rented rather than lived in. So in October 2017, in Los Angeles, 18% of the inherited homes were lived in. And I think that these are $1 million homes, over $1 million homes that are being rented currently. And in October of 18, 20%. In Oakland, 25% of inherited homes that have a value $1 million higher than their assessed value. And in 17, and 31% of those in October of 2018. In San Francisco, 67% of inherited properties that have a market value $1 million more than their assessed value were rented out in October of 17, and in October of 18 it went up to 81%. So this is why the budget effects are that the cities would get less property tax income from a few homes, but more money from many homes. These are for the reassessment of the homes that have increased in value so much that they're worth now in market value $1 million more than the assessed value. The budget effects from the passage of Proposition 19 would provide more money for schools, and some of the new tax money, I think particularly the money that comes in as a result of the reassessment of the more valuable homes that are being rented out. The new tax money must go to firefighting, which limits the budget flexibility on how the additional income would be used. But this is, I think, one way that the people who put the measure on the ballot felt it would sweeten this whole measure. So particularly these days when we're so aware of all the fires. So the people who favor Proposition 19 have raised $40 million, $40,700,000, and those who oppose it have raised $45,000. And you can see the people in those two columns and the organizations and papers in those two columns. The arguments for and against. Those who argue in favor of this say people should not pay higher taxes on their next home if they lose their home in a disaster. And I'm pretty sure that that was already the case, but anyway. And then they also say this measure would close the loophole on inherited homes that are rented out. Those who oppose this measure say that voters rejected this very tax increase in 2018. The measure is not exactly the same as the measure that was on the ballot in 2018, but the concept was similar. And they say that Proposition 19 could hurt families who cannot pay higher taxes on an inherited family home. So if you vote yes for Proposition 19, it means that it'll change property tax transfer laws. And if you vote no, it'll keep the current property tax transfer laws. And so I think we've now done 3 more. Are there more questions about those measures? 17, 18, and 19.
So thank you, Bonnie. Before I unmute everyone, please be prepared to mute yourselves if you're not speaking and there's background noise. If there isn't any background noise, don't worry about it. But if there is, please do. Okay. And you should all be unmuted. We do not have any questions on these 3 measures in the chat box. Does anyone, are there any measures, any questions among our guests here?
If not, we probably should go on because time's going fast and I'm still doing state measures. So. Okay. 2:45 now. So. If
someone comes up with a question afterwards that pops into your head, just put it in the chat and we'll catch it later. Okay, good. Back on mute, everyone. Over to you, Bonnie.
Okay, so Proposition 21 is another initiative that was put on the ballot. Oh,
wait, hang on. 20. Mute all. Hang on.
It said that I was muted.
There you go.
Okay, so Proposition 20 was placed on the ballot by collecting citizen signatures, and this would create a new law. And the people who've put this on the ballot want stronger laws against crimes and parole. The effect of passing Measure 20 would require DNA samples for state and federal databases if a person was convicted of drug possession or shoplifting. It would punish some petty theft as felonies. So a conviction for shoplifting $250 to $950 in value of goods would mean 3 years in jail. And it would cut back on early release from prison if someone were convicted of some felonies, some particular felonies. And a lot of this came about when the state was required actually to do an early release and changed some of the terms of people who were currently in state prison in order to reduce the overcrowding that was occurring in the state position. And the people who have written this measure are concerned about what they feel are side effects of the early release. So budget effects if Proposition 20 were to pass. It could raise the costs of courts, jails, and prisons by tens of millions of dollars per year because more people would be kept in prison longer. Those who are in favor of this have raised $4.3 million, and you can see the list of people who are favoring this measure. Those who are against it have raised $5.6 million, and you can see who the people are who oppose Proposition 20. The arguments for this measure say California laws are not tough enough. Don't let violent criminals get early parole. DNA from drug possession or shoplifting will help solve more serious crimes, such as rape. Those who are against this measure say that California has some of the toughest laws against violent crime, and that millions of dollars for prisons could be spent on millions of dollars that would be spent on prisons could be spent on education, healthcare, or affordable housing, and that it will undo voter-supported prison reforms of the past 10 years, such as the change from the 3 strikes law, or such as decriminalizing the use of marijuana or the possession of marijuana. What your vote means, if you vote yes, it will make laws harder on crime. If you vote no, it will keep the laws the same as they are currently. Proposition 21, and here's another familiar refrain. 2 years ago, we had another measure on the ballot about rent control. This one was placed on the ballot again by collecting signatures. The actual title of this measure is Local Rent Control Initiative, but the result of this is that it would allow more rent controls. The current law, state law limits how much cities can limit rate increases. That is, there are rent controls with current law. Here's the background. 1/3 of California renters pay 50% of their income for housing. High rents add to homelessness. The effect of this measure, Proposition 21, would allow cities to limit rent increases in more situations. So what's the current and what would the future be if Prop 21 passes? Okay. So homes that are 30 years old, you can impose rent control currently. Prop 21 would allow you to impose rent control in properties that were only 15 years old. So newer buildings would now be able to have rent control. Currently, when new tenants moved into an apartment, the rent can go up any amount. If Proposition 21 passes, the rent could only go up 5% per year for the first 3 years, or for a total of 15%. Currently, ongoing tenants get cost of living rises in rent, and that would remain the case in Proposition 21. Currently, there are exemptions to whether or not you can have rent control. You cannot have rent control on single-family homes currently. If Proposition 21, there would still be an exemption for somebody who owned 1 or 2 residential units, but if you owned more than that, then you would not have the exemption, and rent control could be put on single-family homes. Currently, there's no sunset on the current law, the way the current law is set. Proposition 21 provisions would sunset or would go out of business in 2030. The financial effects are hard to calculate because it would depend on how much rent control cities decided to put on various things, but it could lower city income because landlords would be paying less in business tax because they would be collecting less rent. So That's one possible financial effect. Those who favor Proposition 21 have raised $24 million. And you can see who the people who contributed the money. And they were the people who also were backing the previous rent control measure that was on the ballot 2 years ago. And then other people and parties. Those who oppose this measure have raised quite a bit more, almost twice as much. And there you see the list of people who are opposing this measure. Those who are in favor of Proposition 21 says that rent control will help families and seniors stay in their homes. Proposition 21 is fair. It guarantees that landlords can still earn a profit, and that's actually required by law. Those who are against this measure say that rent control can cause evictions, that landlords are likely to do less maintenance because it costs them more and they're taking in less in rents, and that fewer new buildings that have rental units in them will be built because it's less profitable to rent apartments anymore. And those who are against it say that Prop 21 will make housing less available during these hard economic times. So if you vote yes, you're going to increase the number of options for rent control. If you vote no, it will keep the rent controls the same as they are currently controlled by Costa-Hawkins. And then there's Proposition 22. Anybody who's watching television these days knows a little bit about what this one is all about. So this is the app-based drivers as contractors and labor policies initiative. This is a citizen initiative that it was placed on the ballot by gathering signatures, and it would change state law. The background to this initiative: Lyft, Uber, and other app-based driver organizations want their drivers to be independent contractors. However, the California legislature and the courts say that these drivers are employees, not independent contractors. Lyft and Uber and others are under court order to comply with this new law, and they're appealing that law in court. That's all by way of background of Proposition 22. If Proposition 22 is passed, drivers will be considered to be independent contractors, not employees, and they would get, as a result of Proposition 22, guaranteed 120% of minimum wage, some reimbursement for health insurance, and some help with car maintenance. But as independent contractors, they don't get overtime pay for wait time between rides, paid sick leave or workers' compensation insurance, state unemployment insurance, and the right to unionize. So that's if Proposition 22 is passed. These effects will come into being. Those who are for this measure have raised, believe it or not, $185 million. And you see there the people that use all the drivers based on app. And those who are against it have raised $13.7 million. And you can see the people who are in that list. Those who argue in favor of Proposition 22 say that drivers want to be independent contractors. Forcing companies to hire employees would end hundreds of thousands of jobs. Those who are against this measure say these companies don't want to pay basic benefits. As employees, drivers would get benefits that they deserve, such as sick pay and unemployment. What your vote means: if you vote yes for Proposition 22, app drivers are contractors. Companies and the voters make the employment law. If you vote no on Proposition 22, app drivers are considered to be employees. The legislature and the courts make the employment law. So I think we can stop very briefly for questions now on Proposition 20, 21, and 22. Are there any written questions on those three?
There are no written questions. I've unmuted everyone if anyone's got anything burning. If not, one. 3, 2, 1.
Okay,
All right, Bonnie, back to you. Okay, so I'm gonna mute and then I have to unmute you, Bonnie. So hang on one sec.
thanks.
Oh, yes, unmute. Okay, there you go.
So Proposition 23 is another one that sounds familiar because 2 years ago, we also were voting on kidney dialysis clinics. Proposition 23 calls for more regulations on kidney dialysis clinics, and it was placed on the ballot by collecting signatures. By way of background, there are about 550 dialysis clinics in California, and dialysis patients now live longer, so that the number of them is increasing. DaVita Kidney Care and Fresenius Medical Care own most of the for-profit clinics in California. The Service Employees International Union would like to unionize these companies, improve care, and cap company profits. The effect of putting ballot, if Proposition 23 passes, it would require a licensed doctor on site during treatment, during an emergency doctor shortage, a nurse or physician assistant is okay. Clinics would have to accept patients regardless of the payment method, Medicare, Medi-Cal, or private pay. And by way of background, the prices that the clinics get for treating patients who are on Medicare or Medi-Cal are set by law. Private pay are negotiated, and people who are private pay patients tend to have to pay a good deal more. And my guess is that sometimes people who are on Medicare and Medi-Cal are not as readily accepted by the clinics, that's why this measure is being promoted. And if Prop 23 passes, a kidney dialysis clinic would need state permission to cut their services or to close. Those who favor this measure have raised $6 million, and most of the money has come from SEIU, United Healthcare Workers West. But you can see the other people who favor this measure. Those who are against it have raised $93 million, and you can see that it's the owners of the kidney dialysis clinics who have raised the money to oppose this measure. Though it's my understanding that the unions have said that if this measure passes, they would be happy. They would be less inclined to try to unionize. That's what they say. Okay. So if you, the people who are in favor say that dialysis is dangerous and that a doctor should always be there. And they say that Prop 23 prevents financial discrimination. Those who oppose this measure say that Prop 23 would take doctors away from hospitals and emergency rooms, and that doctors are not necessary and will cost more. So some clinics might need to close because they have to pay the doctors to be there. If you vote yes, you want these additional regulations on dialysis unit. If you vote no, you want to keep the laws as they are currently.
Bonnie,
Yes.
did you mention, I missed it if you did, that is another measure that is extremely similar to one that was on the 2018 ballot. The proponents who wrote it, which is the labor unions who are supporting it, it failed last time and they put it back on with some minor changes. You may have mentioned that, I apologize.
I mentioned it in passing, but not in that much detail. Okay. So Proposition 24 has to do with consumer privacy. The actual title of the measure is Consumer Personal Information Law and Agency Initiative. And this is something that was put on the ballot by gathering citizen signatures. By way of background, internet companies commonly collect, store, and sell personal information to advertisers. I think a lot of us have become aware of that. Such information may include your cell phone location, your race, ethnicity or religion, your sexual orientation, information from private internet messages, such as the names of catalogs with whom you're placing orders, and some health information such as pregnancy. So this is the kind of information that is gathered and sold. In 2018, the California legislature passed an internet privacy protection law that allows consumers to learn what data is stored, to request that that data is deleted, and to opt out of their information being sold. The effects of Proposition 24, consumers would have the right to correct misinformation held by websites, to say, don't share or sell my private information from this website. And companies would be allowed to charge more to provide such privacy and collect and share your information if you go out of state. I'm not quite sure what that means, but I guess it means that you would be protected if you're in California, but when you're using your internet out of state, you would not be protected. And then it creates a California Consumer Protection Agency. So these are the effects if Proposition 24 were passed. Here's the money that's being raised for it and against it. Those who argue in favor of this measure say that 24 will stop tech companies from tracking everything we do online, that it'll result in higher and faster fines for violating that, and it'll create a new privacy protection agency. Those who oppose Proposition 24 say that there are loopholes in these 52 pages that is what Proposition 24 is, that give too much power to the tech companies, that companies may charge more for privacy protection, and that consumers will have to opt out one website at a time. If you vote yes on 24, it will change the 2018 law. If you vote no, you're saying, let's take time to evaluate the 2018 law. Proposition 25 will replace cash bail with risk assessments. And this is a citizen initiative, and it's a referendum. And what is a referendum? A referendum is when somebody doesn't like a law that has been passed by the legislature and gathers signatures to put the law to the vote of the citizens. So the legislature has passed a law that replaced cash bail with risk assessments, and people said, nope, we want the citizens to vote on that. So background, in 2018, the California legislature passed a law ending cash bail. The law has not yet gone into effect because the opponents blocked it by filing for the referendum. And the referendum asks the voters to accept or reject this law. So the current situation, if suspects are allowed to go home while they're waiting for their court date, bail bonds help assure that they will return on time. If the suspect pays bail and returns on time, they get all of their money back. But the system puts a heavier burden on low-income suspects who can't afford to pay the bail out of their own money, and so they wait in jail or they borrow from a bail bond dealer and pay a non-refundable fee of about 10%. If they return to court on time and are proven innocent, they don't get back the 10% borrowing fee. They do get back, they don't have to repay the loan. The effect of Proposition 25, where suspects wait for court date would depend on their risk to others, the risk that the suspect won't return to court. If they're a high risk not to return, they'll wait in jail if Prop 25 passes. If they were a lower risk, they'll be allowed to wait at home. If they're a medium risk, the judge and risk assessment decide whether the person remains in jail or can go home. They may have to wear a tracking device or a probation check could be required. Those who favor replacing cash bail with risk assessments who favor the law that was passed have raised $11.8 million and are listed there. People who are against replacing cash bail with risk assessments are listed on the right-hand column. And you can see that a lot of those are the bail bonds organizations, but there are others who are opposing this measure. And what are they saying? The people who favor this argument say that decisions will be based on public safety, not on the ability to pay, and that the current system is unfair. If you can't pay, you stay in jail, no matter the severity of your crime. Those who are against this measure say that releasing people from jail will make communities less safe, and that decisions may be made by computer programs which have historically discriminated against African Americans. So those are the arguments for and against. The budget effects. If Proposition 25 passes, setting up the new assessment system will be expensive, but there will be an overall lower cost because fewer people will have to wait in jail. What your vote means: if you vote yes, you will end the bail bond system. You will accept the 2018 law. If you vote no on Proposition 25, you'll keep the bail bond system and reject the 2018 law. So that's the end of the state measures. Are there any questions on those last three measures? Two measures. So I think you are muted, Zabe, because I can't hear you.
Sorry, thank you. I just said I've unmuted everyone, but you may still have yourselves muted. There was only, let's see, Kay Schwartz says, I hope this will be available, oh, right, to watch, it will be available to watch. Lee Temkin wrote right after we got started again, and Lee, I'm not quite sure what you're referring to here. It says, who did the 4-to-1 survey? Who did the 4-to-1 survey in support of that? Might be April 1, I don't know. Lee, what, can you restate that question for us? You might need to take yourself.
This was about the Uber Lyft change. Now, it says that Uber Lyft drivers support this initiative by 4-to-1. Was that an independent group? Like, who did this? We hear that number all the time.
That's a very good question, and I don't, off the top of my head, know the answer to that. Let me see whether I can, whether there's anything in some of this other material that I have.
Bonnie, was that on the pro-con list? Where did that come from?
Probably, and I cannot back up. I thought I knew how to do that, but what I thought I knew how to do, oh, wait a minute, it does back up. Just a minute, I can go back. But it's Proposition 22, so let's see what it says.
Sourcing companies.
Okay, no, it's not in the pro-con. Oh.
App drivers. Oh, hi, cutie.
So.
Lee, where is that something that Bonnie said, or did you hear it elsewhere?
I think it must have been somewhere else because it's not.
It was listed here. It was definitely listed here. I've seen it in many places, though.
Okay.
Yeah, sorry for this delay.
No,
well, it's not on my slides, and I know that I did not say that. So it may be something that you've read elsewhere. And this is probably a good time to say that please don't let this presentation be the only information that you seek on these measures. There is lots of good information out there on the web. In your voter information pamphlet, it has come from the Secretary of State. If you have questions, if you want to read the full text, there's an organization called Ballotpedia, which has a website that does very extensive descriptions of the pros and cons of the ballot measures. This is the League's presentation, and as I say, we have drawn what the pro people say and what the con people say from several sources. It's not our information, it's information that's available out there.
The program is still running.
Alsar, you're not on mute. Here, I can mute you. Maybe there. We got it. Okay. Bonnie, are we later on going to give people some information on where else they can go to get more information on the measures?
Yes.
Okay, so we'll get to that as well. And Hillary just put Ballotopedia on the chat. Thank you. And Susan Pierpoint says the Chronicle states Prop 24 is too flawed, noting that the companies that would be expected to oppose it are not contributing money. Does the League of Women Voters have a position on this?
And I don't remember, and I am not supposed to talk about the League's positions on this. I will be giving you a source of that information at the end of my presentation, but I'm supposed to talk just about the pros and the cons. If the League supported a measure, they are listed in the list of supporters. If they opposed it, they're listed in the list of opponents. So which measure was it? And I can back up and we can look. And
it's Prop 24.
Prop 24, okay, hold on just a minute.
The League is opposed to that measure.
Okay.
So
my going forward and backwards doesn't work anymore. I can only go forward, so it's time to start the local measures. And besides that, it is 10 after 3. So if I'm going to finish by 3:30, I probably ought to get going.
Okay, great. And by the way, Hillary also just posted the source, I believe, of that survey, Lee. So check the chat box. All right, I'm going to mute everyone and then unmute Bonnie. One moment. Yes, and then unmute. Okay, Bonnie.
Okay, so now I'm going to talk about local and regional ballot measures. And first I'll talk about the City of Oakland measures. There are 3 of those. The first is QQ, and it will amend the city charter, and it would allow youth to vote in school board elections. By way of background, voting for school board normally is limited to voters age 18 and over. This measure, which was put on the ballot because of a campaign that was led by students, would allow youth ages 16 and 17 to vote on school board elections. And the campaign said that they should be allowed to do that because the decisions made by the school board affect them directly. It's interesting to note that a similar measure to this QQ passed in the city of Berkeley in 2016 and has yet to be implemented. They're working hard on it, but it is complicated because of who gets which ballots. And already Alameda County is dealing with multiple different types of ballots, and to add this to the mix would probably cost the city of Berkeley quite a bit to put this measure into effect. And it would also cost Oakland. So the effect of passing this measure, it's an advisory measure. The effect would allow the city council to adopt this plan, but presumably they'll do some research before they do that. And it was placed on the ballot by the city council in response to the campaign of the students. There aren't any, passing the measure would not result in any immediate fiscal effects. However, if the council decided to put it on the ballot and passed legislation to actually implement all this change in the amendment, the additional costs to the city could be as much as 7 to 10 million additional costs for every school board election, that is every 2 years. As I say, it has to do with the registrar having to send a particular kind of ballot just to 16 and 17-year-olds, where he may be in a household where the rest of his family gets to vote on everything, or she. So it can be an expensive venture.
Bonnie, it says, the slide says 7 to 10,000, but is it really 7 to 10 million?
Did I say million? I know it's 7 to 10,000. I'm sorry. That's quite a difference. Thank you for catching that. And as I mentioned, that would depend completely on the implementation details, how the legislation is written to implement such a change, and what could be negotiated with the registrar of voters, which administers the elections. I suppose it might be possible for the city of Oakland to send out the ballots to the youth in this, but I'm not sure about that, because then you'd be mixing the ballots from the city with the ballot. I'm not sure about that. Okay, so where's what's supposed to be on this slide? Arguments for and against. So argument for it that the school board would be more responsive to student needs. And I have a feeling that, and that voting at an earlier age sets lifelong patterns that will increase overall voter participation. And against it, that school budgets and decisions are complicated, and there are other ways to increase voter participation. The supporters of Measure QQ are listed there on the left. And the opponents, nobody filed any opposition arguments to this. And I'm not aware of additional people who have signed up since to oppose this measure. Measure RR is the second City of Oakland measure and will remove a dollar limit on fines for breaking city laws. And this is also a city charter amendment. By way of background, the upper limit on fines in the city charter is a specific amount right now. And that amount was set back in 1968 at $1,000. That's the highest fine that can be put on somebody who breaks a city law. Major violations like illegal dumping are undeterred by small fines. City Council needs flexibility in setting fine limits. The effect is, if Measure RR passes, that there won't be any immediate change in current fines, that the City Council would be allowed to set a new fine limit, but only after having a public hearing on that fine limit that they were suggesting should be set. And it was placed on the ballot by City Council. Fiscal effects, none right now, but if the fines are increased, it could raise more revenue. The arguments for resetting the limit is long overdue since it hasn't been changed since 1968. The city needs flexibility to set fines at levels that will effectively deter major violations of laws. These are the arguments in favor of it. Argument against, concern that the City Council could impose unlimited fines and that this measure is not necessary to deal with illegal dumping. The supporters are the following: a couple of council members, others in the city, and then taxpayer association folks and voters at large. The third city measure that's on the ballot is Measure S1, which will extend the police commission's independence. And this is an amendment to the city charter also. By way of background, in 2016, Measure LL established an Oakland Police Commission and gave them oversight of the police department. It also established a community police review agency, which investigates police misconduct. The question that was not resolved in Measure LL was who could hire the staff for the commission? Was that a function of the city administrator's office, or could the commission hire the staff for the commission? The effect of the passage of Measure S1 would be that it would authorize the police commission to hire and supervise the staff and establish an office of inspector general. The scope also of the police commission's work is extended, in particular to cover areas that are identified in the city's police department for improvement by federal oversight. Those of you who live in Oakland and are familiar with Oakland situations know that for many years now, the Oakland Police Department has had federal oversight. And there are specific areas where the city of Oakland has not met the requirements that the federal oversight has established. And so the scope of the commission would be extended to give them authority to call the police department on not meeting the improvement that's required by the federal oversight. I think Oakland is hoping to be free of federal oversight soon. but perhaps not until they've met all the requirements. This measure was placed on the ballot by the City Council. The fiscal effect would mean an additional budget for the Commission staff, legal advisors, and investigators. The arguments in favor: the Police Commission needs to be fully staffed to be functional and effective. The Police Commission will be empowered to sustain the progress made during federal oversight of the police after the oversight ends. So 2 arguments in favor of the measure. And no arguments against this measure were filed. Supporters: Faith in Action, City Council, the chairperson of the Police Commission, and the Latino Task Force. And no people filed an opposition to this measure. Okay, so those are the 3 Oakland measures, and then there is a 4th measure that all residents of Oakland will be voting on, and this is put on the ballot by the school district rather than by the city. It's Measure Y, and it's the authority to sell bonds to raise money for repair and safety improvement. By way of background, the schools have done significant investigation to find out what their repair and improvement needs are. And the money that would be raised by the sale of these bonds would provide money for classroom repair and school safety improvements. It would upgrade classrooms and science labs and technology. It would improve student safety and security. It would repair bathrooms and electrical systems and plumbing and sewers. And it could not be, and improve energy efficiency and earthquake safety. It could not be used for salaries or other school operating expenses. It was placed on the ballot by the Oakland Unified School District. And the fiscal effects: they would be authorized to sell $735 million worth of bonds over a 30-year period, which would raise $48.5 million a year for 30 years. The bond repayment would result in an increase in property tax. And after all the bonds are sold, the greatest amount of increase per $100,000 of assessed valuation would be $60. That's at the end of the 30-year period. That's how high it could go over the 30-year period during the sale of those bonds. It needs 55% of the electorate to vote in favor of it in order to pass. All the other measures that we've been talking about are just 50% plus 1. Supporters of this measure are listed there. Opponents are listed in the right-hand column. The arguments for this measure: our students need and deserve clean, safe learning environments. The projects were developed and prioritized with a lot of community participation and oversight. And technology upgrades to support distance learning and social distance during pandemic are greatly needed. The arguments against this, and it ensures that schools have the funds to provide the match needed to secure state funding. So in other words, the state often provides grants to local school districts, but most often when they offer this money, the state offers this money, a school district needs to match the funds that they're applying for. And so money raised through this bond would ensure that the schools would have the funds to provide that match to secure the state funding. Arguments against: bonds are bad ways to pay for school repairs. Taxes are already too high. And that's the end of the arguments for the local measures in Oakland. And I'm going to go on ahead because it's almost 3:30 now and talk about the county measure. But then for folks who would like to stay beyond the 3:30 time that we'd originally set, we're glad to stay a little bit longer and talk with you and answer any other questions. So even Berkeley residents live in Alameda County. If you live in north of Berkeley, you are probably in Contra Costa County, so this measure would not affect you. So background for Measure W in Alameda County. Homelessness is an acute problem. It doubled in the last 4 years, and that will only become worse under the economic downturn caused by COVID-19. The effect of passing this Measure W would be that there would be more dollars coming in to the Alameda County General Fund, and that housing and services for those experiencing homelessness, mental health services, job training, and social safety net and other general fund services could be paid for from the general fund. It was placed on the ballot by the Alameda County Board of Supervisors. And the fiscal effects would be a sales increase for a 10-year period. 0.5% increase for 10 years. Oakland sales taxes are currently 9.25 and would go up then to 9.75% on sales. And it's estimated to raise $150 million a year, but this could be less if there are fewer sales because of the recession, because of the COVID. It needs just 50% of the voters to vote for it, 50% plus one to pass. The supporters are the people in the left-hand column there. The opponents are basically the Taxpayers Association members and organization. The arguments for this: homelessness is a critical issue and requires additional funding. The economic downturn created by COVID could worsen homelessness without additional funding. And the funding would also help those at risk of becoming homeless. Arguments against: our sales tax is already high at 9.25. There's concern that funds that go into the general fund will not be used for the homeless services, but on other needs. And sales taxes hurt poorer people more, especially during an economic turndown. So that is the end of my presentation, though there was some additional information that I wanted to give you about that county measure having to do with a measure that was on the ballot in 2016 that also affects property or sales tax. So let me see if I can find that. Okay, so, oh, it was on the primary, it wasn't 2018. So in March of 2020, Alameda County voters voted to raise the sales tax 0.5% in March for funding early childhood and education services. But that measure was challenged in court until recently. And I didn't check this out to find out whether it survived the challenge, but it may have survived the challenge, and so therefore that 5% increase may also start to be collected, and which means that our taxes wouldn't just go up to 10%. Oh no, would not just go up to 9.75%, but would go up to 10.25% sales tax in Alameda County if that March 2020 measure survived the court challenge. It all has to do with whether or not it needed just 50% to pass. A lot of measures require more than 55%, more than 50%, unless they are going to go into the general fund. If they're going to go into the general fund, they only need 50%. If they are earmarked for something in particular, they require a higher percentage of the voters to pass for it. And that's why that measure in March was challenged, because it only required 50% to pass. And that's why this measure, the money is going into the general fund rather than being earmarked specifically in a special fund just for homelessness services. So that is the end of my presentation. Let me just talk about what's on this last slide, because earlier somebody asked I think Zabri asked whether I was going to give people information about where they could find additional information. So
Bonnie,
the first thing that, yes.
hang on, I had accidentally unmuted people because I thought we were doing some Q&A, and to mute them, I've got to mute you for a split second and unmute you. So let me do that really quick so you can continue. Okay, you're good, Bonnie.
Thank you. So one of the very first and most important things that I want to say to all of you is you need to be sure that if you want to vote in the November election, we are all going to receive, all registered voters are going to receive a mail-in ballot. Those ballots are beginning to be mailed right now. Some of you may have gotten them already. A lot of us have not received it yet. But in order to receive that ballot, you need to be registered at the address where you are currently living. But ballots are not forwarded. So if you are not currently registered where you are currently living, you need to re-register. There is time to do that until October 19th. And I think still time, if you register by the 19th, to receive your mail-in ballot by mail. If you miss that October 19th deadline, you can still register to vote. And you can do so at an accessible voting center. And there are voting centers, accessible voting centers, scattered all over Alameda County. If you go to the registrar's website, which is that acvote.org website, you can not only find out whether or not you are registered at your current address, but you can also find out where all those places to either vote or register to vote and vote or deposit your ballot. So voting centers and drop boxes. You can see all of that on the acvote.org website, but you can also see it on votersedge.org. So number one, check to be sure that you are currently registered at your current address. You can do that at the acvote.org site or at the Secretary of State's website. Then if you want more information about the candidates in the measure, where the voting centers are located, where the drop boxes are, and then the election results, go to votersedge.org where you can actually see your own personal ballot. And then there are links to the places where the voting centers are located, links to the places where there are drop boxes. And you can also mail in your mail-in ballot. It is postage paid. You do not need to put additional stamps on your mail-in ballot. And if you get it in early, the post office is probably going to manage that pretty well. And they have also extended, the registrar of voters has extended the amount of time that it can take the post office to get your ballot to the registrar to be counted. So I think it's 17 days after November 3rd, but it has to be postmarked. It has to go to the post office by the 3rd of November. Okay, so then these other websites tell you how you can track your ballot. All of our ballots will have special barcodes, and so you can actually track your own ballot and see where it is in the process, whether it's gotten to the registrar, whether the registrar has counted it or not. The registrar in Alameda County tries very hard not to have to discard voted ballots. If your signature on your outside envelope when you vote by mail does not match the signature that is on file for you, you will be contacted and have a chance to talk to somebody at the registrar about that. So do not despair. Just do as much as you can to be prepared to be sure that you are registered at your current address and that you, the signature or the name under which you are registered is the one that you're currently using. Or if you're not, I'm not sure whether you have to register if you have changed your name. For example, I use my full name, my first name, my middle name, and my last name when I registered to vote. But sometimes I just sign my first name and my middle initial and my last name. I don't know how much leeway the registrar gives you, but it's good to go to that acvote.org and find out how you are registered, by what name you are registered, and then re-register if you need to, but at least be aware of what signature you're going to put on that outside envelope before you mail back your vote by mail ballot. Just by way of some of you may know this already, some of you may not, but in California, the registrar can start processing vote by mail ballots quite a bit of time before the actual election. They can check your signature and make sure that you have signed it properly on the outside envelope. And then they take your ballot out of that envelope and discard that envelope. Your ballot is still in a privacy envelope. They can remove it from the privacy envelope and straighten it out so that when they can actually, and I think they can actually start tallying those measures, can actually do the processing of the measures or the ballots. They cannot report any of the results of the vote until after 8 o'clock in the evening on November 3rd. But they can actually do the preparation and the counting of the ballots that they receive before November 3rd. So if we want results in Alameda County early, get your ballots in early if you can. Then if you'd like more information about things, more information than you can find on Voter's Edge, go to our website, the lwvo.org website. And there are links there to Ballotpedia, to Cal Matters, which has done short videos of the ballot measures, the state ballot measures. There will be links to short videos that the League of Women Voters of Oakland has made of our local ballot measures. There's a link to a wonderful document that we produce called the Oakland Easy Voter Guide. lwvo.org is a source of lots of good information. And rather than giving you a whole list of other websites to go to, I encourage you to go to our website. And that's where you'll find out the recommendations that the League has made as to which measure to vote for and which ones which measures the League recommends voting against. As I say, I'm doing pros and cons today. I can't tell you the vote with the League at all. So that's going to be the end of my presentation now. It's about 20 minutes before 4. If there are questions that anybody has that you think I might be able to answer, I'm willing to stay on a little bit longer. Eric told us that we have the Zoom platform until 4. So if you want to unmute people, Zabre, or tell me of any questions that have come up, I'd be glad to say something.
Okay, everyone's unmuted on my end. And let's see, going backwards from bottom to top on the chat box, Susan says, can we assume the addressee on our ballot is the same as the signature on file?
Yes. Yes,
Yeah.
that's the information that they will use to address your mail-in ballot. And that's how you'll know whether or not you should re-register if you're using a different signature or wish to be registered under a different name. I mean, perhaps you've been married since you got, registered to vote initially and you have changed your name, or maybe you've gotten divorced and you've changed your name. So do look at the address on your mail-in ballot to see how you are registered.
And if you go to acvote.org and click in the upper right corner, my hands look funny on the screen, but it'll say voter profile. If you click on that, it'll ask you for your name, your driver's license number, your birthday, and then you can basically see your ballot and you can see the ballot pamphlet. Someone said they hadn't gotten theirs yet. I haven't gotten mine either, but I got on there last night and I could see everything on that site, acvote.org.
That is very helpful to know. I didn't realize one could see the sample ballot there. That's great. I knew that that's where you could see your profile, but yeah.
Okay, and then Judith mentioned you can vote. This is important. You can vote in person now at the county office on Fallon Street in Oakland. There are other vote centers probably where you can also vote in person if you don't want to use your ballot. If you are using your ballot at home and you make a mistake, which is called spoiling it, as you know, take it to a vote center and they should give you a new one and you should be able to vote there and submit it. So if you make a mistake, it's not over, but you got to go to a vote center give them your spoiled ballot. They'll give you a new one and you can vote there.
That's right.
I just wanted to say, this is Judith. I did talk to the registrar the other day. For now, the only voter center in Alameda County is at the county building. Starting, I think, 4 days before the election, there will be other vote in person centers. But
Yes.
for now, if you want to vote in person, you have to go there.
Thank you.
The
Great.
vote centers, the accessible voting centers open on October 31st and are open the 31st, the 1st, 2nd, and 3rd for voting. On the 31st and the 1st and the 2nd, they're open limited hours. I think it's 10 to 5 maybe. But on election day, they will be open from 7 in the morning until 8 at night. And so take your spoiled ballot there. If you don't want to trust your ballot to the mail, take your your voted ballot there. Yeah. If you have spoiled your ballot, it's a good idea to take the spoiled ballot with you. And that way they will give you a ballot and allow you to vote it right then and there. If you don't bring in a ballot and we all should receive one, they will give you a provisional ballot. And so they will count it if they don't have any proof that you have already voted. So
I think they count provisional ballots last. It's a
yes.
different, so better to bring your spoiled ballot if you can, but otherwise that's right. And also there should be, I think there's supposed to be 66 ballot drop boxes in Alameda County spread around. If you Google that, it's very easy to find. It's very searchable if you want to just bypass the US Post entirely.
And those drop boxes are available now.
Yeah.
And the ballots that are dropped there will be picked up the way mail is picked up from mailboxes.
Bonnie, or if anyone else knows the answer to this, Susan asked if the school bond address includes ventilation, the repairs that they include, can they improve ventilation? I know they've got a pre-approved list that is at least where to start. It's pretty long. I don't know if it includes that. I sure would hope so. I'm sure that'll be a conversation point if it's not included. And
they have done a survey to determine how many repairs need to be done and come up with billions of dollars of repairs that need to be made.
Yeah.
I am pretty sure that ventilation is one of the things that they will be doing, but I didn't list it. And so check your ballot book, your sample ballot, when you receive it, or if you don't receive one, and I've not gotten mine yet, go to acvote.org and go to your voter profile and read about the details, because I'm pretty sure that they list in great detail what will be done. I'm sure that there is a list, and the things that are on that specific list are the ones that they can spend the bond money on.
Yeah, I'm gonna go look myself, because
Yep.
if it doesn't include ventilation, there's going to be a big fight over that, because
Yeah.
that's
Yep.
Any other questions? Bonnie, I think you've done a great job.
Thank you.
Great job. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for your
Yeah,
attention.
this
It
was
was
terrific.
lovely. It was my first one this year, and I appreciate your patience with difficulties in managing things and not having all the answers. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Thank you.
everyone. Have a great afternoon.
All right.
You too.
Bye-bye.
Bye.